we'll go ahead and get started to make sure we have enough time for our conversation today and hopefully some Q&A and discussion with all of you. Welcome to our annual Father's Day event. I'm Jennifer Sabatini-Frayone, and I am the Director of Corporate Partnerships here at the Center for Work and Family. And I'm pleased to welcome our roundtable members as well as a number of guests who are joining us today to learn about the latest research on working dads, as well as hearing a conversation with two working dads who are also leaders in their organizations. We have not approached the Father's Day event in this way before, and we're very excited to get to hear the voices of some real world dads today. So before we begin, I just wanted to let you know that this session is being recorded, and we will follow up with an email to you tomorrow that has a link to the recording as well as some additional resources, some of which that we have developed in our New Dad research series. If you can please keep your lines on mute for the presentation today, that will help minimize the background noise, and we do encourage you to participate via the chat. You can input any comments you have on the conversation or questions for any of the speakers. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Professor Brad Harrington, who's the Executive Director of the BC Center for Work and Family, and also a research professor here at Boston College. He is the founder and the lead author of the New Dad research series. And he's here today to share his latest insights on working dads. So welcome, Brad.
Thanks very much, Jennifer, and welcome everybody. June is obviously Father's Day month, and so that's the month that we always mark that important occasion and try to share some of our latest information about fathers. Let me do the most challenging piece of this for me will be learning how to share my screen. Let's see if I can do that. Was I successful? Yes. Okay. I'm getting positive feedback from my people. So that's very good news. I'm not always great at this, but so thanks everybody for joining. And today we're going to go through a little bit of background about the studies that we've done on fatherhood and give you just a little quick overview of the New Dad research, which has been going on now for 13 years. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how to understand the challenges fathers face, and specifically the challenges that fathers face who really want to be caregivers, but are not necessarily able to, and then look at some of the impact that that has on working moms. We're going to look at just 3 models of fatherhood, which I've discussed before, and take a look at the different modes fathers tend to be in and what is the impact of being one of those 3 fatherhood types. And then we're going to hear from 2 executives from member companies, John Hancock Manulife and also from Instron. And we're going to ask these guys to talk about their roles as working dads and as caregivers, but we're also going to ask them a little bit about how they think we can do a better job in the workplace of supporting fathers in their parenting roles and their caregiving roles from a leadership perspective. So a lot of times we talk about what the dads can do and what organizational policies can help to foster, fathers as more active caregivers. But in this session, we also want to talk to a couple of dads who are in leadership roles and ask them what can leaders do also to get fathers on board with balancing their life between breadwinning and caregiving. Okay. So if you haven't joined us before, the Center for Work and Family, our mission is really to work with progressive employers. And we've really tried to develop a learning community that fosters the employee experience. As a university center, we've always been a bridge that tries to link research and practice. The idea is to help practitioners really learn from the research that's occurring and then craft and create human resource strategies that are really based on evidence-based research. So in other words, it's just not, here's the latest, fad in management, but rather what are the things we know from evidence and from research that are impactful and that really help to engage and empower our workers. So that's really what our mission is. And the organizations that support that mission are kind of characterized on this slide with most of their organizational logos. And you can see they represent a pretty broad range of industries. We have a number of different pharmaceutical companies, insurance, professional services, healthcare, hotel and what's the word? Hotels and related services. We have a number of different large universities, and we have manufacturers as well. So we're privileged to have about 50 member organizations. These folks provide both the financial resources and also the support that allows us to do a lot of our research and programming. And a couple of the folks that are going to be speaking today are from our member companies. Okay, so just a quick background on the New Father Research Series. This has been going on, I say 11 years. It's been going on almost 13 years now. And we've published 9 reports on the changing role of fathers. We started this back in 2009. That was our initial research study, which we published in 2010. And at that time, there was very, very little conversation about what was happening with fathers and what fathers' roles were in the family and how those roles were changing. And after being in the director's role for 9 years, I decided it was really time for us to take a much closer look at what was going on with fathers and get a more nuanced picture of how working dads were coping with their heightened role in the family, and the fact that many, if not most, had a spouse that was working oftentimes full-time and oftentimes in jobs that were just as responsible, if not more so, than the dads were. And so how are they making the adaptation and adjustments? So we began these studies back in 2010 in terms of our publications. And over the years, we've captured the perspective of, by this point, well over 5,000 professional fathers. Most of our audience are white-collar, college-educated fathers. Not all, but most of the people in our samples fit that mold, and most of them work in the kind of companies that I just showed you on the slide with all the logos. So it's a lot of people in the knowledge industry that are in professional services industries that we work with. So over the years, we tried to, every year that we published a report, get a different slant on, what was going on with dads, whether it was their transition to fatherhood for new dads, or whether that was their views on parental leave, or we did spend a year where we looked at home dads, and then we looked at generational differences amongst fathers between, obviously millennials and how they differed from the attitudes about shared caregiving from, say, Gen X and baby boomers. Okay. Let me just I use these 2 slides that sort of just ground you to make sure that you are aware of what is the broad picture, or the big picture, I should say, on what's happening with fathers and mothers these days in the US. And the next 2 slides come from the Pew Research Center. And they really look at a trajectory over a period of about 50 years. So what you can see is on this slide, the green line represents the fathers, husbands, if you will, that are primary or sole caregivers. That's the light green line at the top. The darker green line further down is what are the situations where wife is either the primary or the sole caregiver. And what you see is in 1972, 85% of the husbands that the Pew Research Center studied were the primary or sole breadwinner, in their families. And you can see over time that percentage has dropped to the point where it's closer to 50% in 2022. By contrast, women were only the primary breadwinners in 5% of households in 1972, 11%. It was pretty much an equal split where women and men were earning somewhere between 40 to 60% of the salary or the income for the family. But in the situations where the wife was either primary or sole, it was only 5%. Today, that number is up to 16%. But if you couple that with egalitarian, you see that 45% of US households are either egalitarian or the wife is the primary breadwinner. So it really has shifted a lot, and it's continuing to shift as more and more women come out of universities, get good jobs, and continue to progress in the corporate hierarchy. The problem we'll talk about in just a minute is at a certain point, young women's career opportunities tend to plateau a bit. And one of the major reasons for that, obviously, is the responsibilities they take on for work and family issues. The second thing we'll look at is a slide that compares 1965, so it's a little more dated, to 2016 for both women and men. And if you look at these stacked bar charts, on the left is the 2 bar charts are women's pictures in terms of how the breakdown of their work time looked in 1965, and it compares it to 2016. And on the right are the same 2 bar charts for working dads. So on the left, you see that the average mother in the US spent 9 hours in paid employment. In 1965, they spent 32 hours in housework and 10 hours providing childcare. If you fast forward 50 years, that picture's changed fairly dramatically. So this is across all mothers, working and non-working. But the average mother in the US spends 25 hours and it's probably up a bit since then in paid employment today in the United States. 18 hours in housework and 14 hours providing childcare. So you can see the attention to housework has diminished as we've outsourced some of those activities, or we've decided to live with dirtier houses or whatever it might be. And fathers have stepped up and done some things there. But also, while that's changed, and while women have increased the amount of time in the workplace, they still spent more time in childcare activities than they did in 1965. If you look to the right, you can see the same kind of profile for dads. In 1965, the average father in the U.S. worked 46 hours a week, spent only 4 hours doing housework, so 1/8 as much as their spouse, and only 2.5 hours in childcare, so 1/4 as much as their spouse. And in 2016, that number went down a little bit to 43%. A lot of the reason it went down is because there are fewer fathers as a percentage. There are fewer fathers in the labor force today than there were back in 1965. And then they increased the amount of time in housework to 10 and childcare to 8. So in total now, women do 32 hours of unpaid work, if you will, housework and domestic tasks and childcare, and men spend about half as much time, 18 hours in those kinds of activities. So there is still an imbalance that exists between men and women when it comes to not who does the most, but who does what. So really the issue isn't I'm doing more than he is. It's a question of I'm doing more unpaid work than he is, and fathers are spending more time in the office and less time in the caregiving activities. So if we go to the next slide. Why did dads do less at home? Well, there's a bunch of theories why that may be the case. But as you can imagine from the slide I showed a moment ago, fathers typically do contribute more to family income than moms do. They're likely to work longer hours and be more frequent travelers. In fact, one of the dads on our panel today is traveling this morning at 5 a.m. and he's going to be zooming in from Minnesota. And that's more common for dads than for moms. Many of the dads had at-home mothers or mothers who worked part-time. So the dad's experience was, kind of formed with a situation where their father was the primary breadwinner and their mother was not necessarily in the workplace, or if she was, it was on a part-time basis. That's changed, and it's changing a lot right now. And one of the things we found that I'll talk about a little bit later at the end of the presentation is that if a father grew up in a household where their mother worked full-time, that makes a big difference in terms of those young fathers today really seeing their responsibility as much more a kind of an equal share with their spouse or partner. Fourth, I think corporate cultures haven't caught up to fathers' realities. This also is changing pretty rapidly, but you might hear conversations about how, the guys at the bottom or the guys who are earlier in their career, in their 20s and 30s, they almost invariably these days, especially in areas like Boston or New York or San Francisco, almost invariably have a full-time working spouse, but some of the senior executives in companies don't. And so there's always that sort of gap that exists between the experience of senior executives and those of folks in the rank and file positions. And in spite of the higher expectations that we've placed on dads, the expectation that fathers will do more than they've done in the past, I think dads who are conspicuously involved in caregiving still sometimes face stigma and marginalization as a result of the fact that they're seen as not as career focused as they should be. Some people, some wives probably would say that the other reason fathers do less is they shirk their caregiving responsibilities, which I have been known to do on occasion. So I do know there is some validity to that assertion, but that doesn't explain the entire picture here. Why is this important, not just for men, but for women? Women and men these days start their careers at much more equal positions than they did, a couple of decades ago. And that's because of the fact that women are graduating in larger numbers than men from universities and from master's degree programs. The average across the U.S. is something like 60-40 in terms of college graduates, women versus men. And they seem to have very, very equal career paths up until children arrive, and then all of a sudden things change. What happens, obviously, when children arrive is historically women have been offered, paid or unpaid, the opportunity to take some period of leave. And that interrupts their career path. And obviously, the longer the leave, the more likely it is that could have some kind of a disadvantage on women when they return to the workplace. As partly as a result of the fact they have the interrupted leaves and they are spending, months at a time where men were spending days at a time at home with newborns, or with second or third children for that matter, women kind of get cast into role of really taking on the lion's share of caregiving. And unless, that something changes that, I think that continues on course. So once that's been established, even when the woman returns to work, even in a full-time position, I think the expectation is that she will still be the primary caregiver. Once that happens too, in terms of organizational dynamics, oftentimes mothers are seen as less committed to their careers because they have children. And the sad thing is they're seen that way, whether they feel that way or not. So there is kind of a sense that occurs that once women have children, they have to be, or they need to be less committed to their careers. And I think that's an unfortunate a result of the fact that we still see things through somewhat gendered lenses, and we don't have that equality on the home front. And oftentimes, as a result of this, women can't or not offer the opportunity to take on higher level roles due to that critical role they play in the family. So when we talk about, women's advancement and the importance of women's advancement, and organizations are doing so much to try to advance women into more senior level roles, one of the things that they have to pay attention to is, are we just as actively encouraging men to play roles in the home? Because if we're not encouraging men to play an important caregiving role in the home, then no matter what we do in terms of women's advancement programs, it's going to be very difficult for women to take on jobs of greater responsibility. This goes back to the very first study we did, or the first quantitative study we did in 2011. And I show this more just from a historical perspective. In 2011, so that's 12 years ago, we did a study. We had just under 1,000 fathers from 4 large corporations that participated in the study. And that study, we asked the question, on a continuum, on one end of the continuum, earning your job is really, as a dad, is to earn enough money to meet your kids and your family's financial needs. On the other end, which is the low end of this bar chart, you see your role is really primarily or solely being about physically and emotionally caring for the needs of your child. And these are all gradation levels in between, with the large bar being, I find my role to be an equal balance between caring for my child and earning enough money to meet my family's financial needs. In 2011, we asked that question. We expected that the answers would be skewed toward the bottom. I'm sorry, excuse me, toward the top. We thought that men, yes, they were responsible for taking care of their children's emotional needs and physical needs and so forth, but we felt that there would be a really strong bias towards seeing their role as breadwinners. But as you can see, even in 2011, nearly 70% of the fathers who answered this question really saw their role as an equal balance between those two things. And that really told us that, men, especially, younger men, are not seeing their role as, I'm a breadwinner and I have a very kind of marginalized role in the home. They saw their role as being equally important on both fronts. Second thing that surfaced early on, and this was again from the first study we did, it was a quantitative study, was this issue of the conflicted father. We started to see messages that were being sent across the survey results that suggested that fathers were sort of in one of these modes where they really wanted to be more actively involved at home, but they also at the same time wanted to be more actively involved and more able to attain higher level of career responsibilities in the workplace. So these dads worked for very large companies, and they reported that they spent about 2.5 hours a workday with their children, not all in caregiving, but with their children, whether that's playing, watching TV, whatever it might be. 77% of the dads said that they would like to spend more time with their children than they did at present. And 22% said they were satisfied with the amount of time. Only 1% said that they'd like to spend less time with their children than they do currently. And we wondered if these were the last honest men. That was a joke. So the 3/4 of the guys said, I want more time with my children than I have at present. However, in the same study, 3/4 of the men said, I want a job with greater responsibility than the one I currently hold. And 60%, just under 60%, said, I would like to reach a role in senior management with my organization. And these organizations were like $20 to $60 billion in revenue. So they were huge organizations. And we really asked ourselves the question, how can these same men say, I want more time with their children, but also say, I want to take on a job with so much greater responsibility? And this is where the theme of the conflicted father really started to surface. And this is not dissimilar to women who would, the old thing of they want to have it all. I think this is just the male representation of that, which is dads want to have it all, but they aren't necessarily seeing the conflict that arises from having those kind of ideal aspirations to be an ideal worker and an ideal parent at the same time. So based on the results of the questionnaires we've done, and we did these in let me see, we did them in 2011, we did them in 2015 and 16, and again in 2019. We developed a model, if you will, for the three types of dads that we started to see in large numbers in the studies that we had conducted. The first type of dads were the ones, we asked two questions, and this was the easiest way to identify which group the fathers fell into. The first group of dads were what we call traditional dads. And these were fathers, when we asked the question, how should caregiving to be divided? They said, my wife or my partner should do more than I do. So they were in the mode of, the dads from the 60s and 70s and 80s who probably said, she's at home more than I am, and she should provide more care than I do. And a lot of the traditional dads did have wives who worked part-time, or in some cases, it didn't work at all outside of the home. The second group of fathers were the fathers who said, I think caregiving should be a 50-50 proposition, and it is 50-50. At least from their perspective, they felt that they were acting as egalitarian fathers, and that they were, taking on more or less 50% of the responsibilities in terms of caregiving and domestic tasks. And then the third group of fathers were what we call conflicted fathers. And these were the fathers who said, I think caregiving should be a 50-50 proposition, but it's not. And my wife does more than I do. And these roughly came out in thirds. We had about roughly, 30% or 32% traditional dads. I think we had 35 or 6% egalitarians and about the same number of conflicted fathers. So they fell into three fairly similar groups. And we've seen this grouping repeat itself in each of the subsequent studies we did, as I said, over the past 10 years. So this is not something that came up once and we never were able to see this phenomenon again. It continued to surface in all the different studies we did. So we had this large group of fathers who said, I want to be a shared caregiver. I have an aspiration to be an egalitarian partner, and I'm not. And so there was some obvious dissonance that existed between these men's aspirations and their reality. When we looked at how the three groups, the traditional, the egalitarian, and the conflicted fathers, scored on the many, many different metrics we looked at in terms of trying to measure life satisfaction, career satisfaction, fulfillment, ease of doing, balancing work and family, and so forth. One of the things we found is the traditional dads were the happiest in terms of where they had risen to in the organization. They were also the happiest in terms of their pay levels. But the egalitarian fathers seemed to be the happiest in almost every other measure in terms of their work and life fulfillment. Conflicted fathers scored the poorest of any of the three groups on virtually every measure. So if you look at the things that are stated in the positive, like I really feel part of my work group, or I'm satisfied with my progress toward career goals, conflicted fathers scored the lowest. They scored the highest on areas of dissatisfaction. Employees who take time for personal matters aren't viewed as committed. They scored the highest on that. I often think about leaving my job. They scored the highest on that. I'm satisfied with my life. They scored the lowest on that. So overall, you get this picture of these guys who aspire to be egalitarian, but are actually in this conflicted mode, are guys who really ought to think hard about, why do I feel like this? Not that we all don't feel like this at some point in time, and what can I do about it? So more recently, we've been looking at one of the most significant trends around fatherhood and sort of how organizations support fathers. And what's encouraging is our study that we did in 2019 really was focused on how men how men are responding to organizations that provide more gender equitable parental care or parental leave policies. So in 2009, we decided we would look at 4 organizations that were offering gender neutral paid parental leave policies. And the good thing about this, just so you know, is that when we look at whether dads will take it or not, a lot of people say, oh, dads won't take leave if you offer it to them. Well, the organizations we studied offered 100% replacement pay. So fathers may not be quick on the uptake on everything, but when it came to this issue, when they saw that they were going to be paid fully if they took time off to be home with their newborns, a lot of fathers did take advantage of that. So what isn't surprising when these companies offered this expanded paid parental leave, and by the way, it was between 6 and 16 weeks that they were offered. 93% of the women took the full leave at full pay, and as you can imagine, that's not very surprising given the fact that a lot of women took leave in the past and were not paid at all for that time. So it's not at all surprising that the women were quick to take the leave. What was surprising is 62% of the dads took the full leave that was available to them. And what was encouraging is that the level of support they received from their leaders was pretty high. So let me just give you 2 reference points here. When fathers were offered 8 weeks of leave, the guys who responded to our study, and we had about 500 fathers who responded to the study, and about 800 or 900 moms, if I remember correctly, or something along those lines. Of the fathers who responded to the study, if they were offered 8 weeks, their average leave was 7.2 weeks. So they were taking 73% of the leave that was made available to them. And if it was 16 weeks that they were offered, 53% took the full leave, and the average amount of leave that the fathers took was 12.8 weeks. So that's pretty significant in terms of how much time dads were willing to take off in order to spend time and bond with their new children. The other thing that was encouraging was that we asked the question of both moms and dads, and the moms' answers are in the maroon, the dads' answers are in gold. We asked, what kind of support did you receive when you were taking the leave? And these are the answers. These are the people who said, I felt extremely supported in the amount of in the leave that I was taking from these parties. So you can see, we looked at human resources, coworkers, managers, senior management, and clients. And you can see in these results, yes, the women by and large got almost 80% or more than 80% in a few cases of extremely supportive responses from their managers, coworkers, and so forth. But the men, in an encouraging way, about 3/4 were receiving high levels of support from their colleagues, 2/3 from their managers, and more than half from senior leaders. So even though the support isn't quite as high for dads, given this is a relatively new phenomenon, and given these fathers were taking somewhere between 6 and 16 weeks off, it was really encouraging to see that they were strongly supported in their decision to do so. So this year, what we've been working on is looking at the data from that and trying to figure out, when we look at these conflicted fathers who say they aspire to be egalitarian, what are the things that is going to predict the likelihood that fathers are able to achieve that ideal, which is not only do I want to share caregiving equally, but I do. And these are some of the data points we came out with. We found that fathers who utilize paid parental leave where that's available, or exercise the opportunity to work remotely, at least on occasion, were more likely to find themselves in egalitarian caregiving situations. We also found that fathers who worked less than 50 hours a week were more likely to be in egalitarian situations. Some of these things are not probably surprising. One thing about remote work is that if dads were more likely to work remotely, that increased the likelihood of them being in an egalitarian relationship with their spouse. If moms exercised that same privilege and worked remotely, that decreased the likelihood that the couple would have an egalitarian arrangement. Fathers earning similar amounts or slightly less than their spouse were more likely to be egalitarian. And women who overworked over 50 hours a week and who worked in high status jobs were more likely to be in an egalitarian situation. I guess that's kind of a bad news, good news story, because it's great that they're now more in an egalitarian situation, not so great that they have to work over 50 hours a week to find themselves more prone to be in that kind of a relationship. And then we found that women who were more willing and able to negotiate for equality, both at work and at home, were the ones who were more likely to find themselves in an egalitarian situation. The other thing we found, which wasn't quite as strong, is that men who describe themselves in terms of their personal characteristics as being particularly warm were more likely to be involved in an egalitarian relationship as well. The last point I'll make is just that, the one thing that we saw with both partners is, if you want to increase the likelihood that there will be more egalitarian marriages and parenting arrangements going forward, the one thing that they both seem to concur on is that they have to be in a family-friendly role. So if either moms or dads are in a situation, and especially dads, where they're in a role that just doesn't allow themselves to pay adequate attention to caregiving, then that really greatly diminishes the likelihood that they're going to be in an egalitarian situation. So with that, I'm going to wrap up my part of the thing and really turn to being a interviewer and facilitator. And we're going to invite 2 fathers who are kind enough to join us. They're both senior leaders in their respective organizations. One is really a senior leader in more of a line position, the other in more of a human resource position. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves. But Pete and Duncan, thank you so much for joining us for this. And I'm going to let you guys, if you don't mind, just start out by describing what your role is and in your organization, and also a little bit about your current family situation. So at this point, I'm going to stop sharing, and I think we're going to spotlight Pete and Duncan in just a second. Wow, already. Am I seeing what everybody else is seeing? I assume I am. So welcome, Pete, and welcome, Duncan, to the session. So Pete, you work with, Johnny Hancock Manulife. Maybe you could just tell us a little bit about your role there. You are a leader, so what size organization do you manage? And also, the more important role that you play, which is your role at home and as a dad.
Yeah, sure. Brad, thanks so much. And thank you for inviting me to be a part of this panel. I'm
Sure.
excited to be here. And thanks everyone for joining, and Duncan for being a fellow panelist. So I do work for John Hancock. I look after our personal investing business, which is about 300 plus people across, mostly in Boston, but across the US. And we have a few folks in Canada as well, because we do have a Canadian parent company. I have 3 children. I have a working wife. She works full time. I have 3 children, a girl, boy, girl at 8, 7, and 3.
Yes.
So we have.
Why do you look so sane right now?
Yeah. No, there's a lot of insanity behind me. But yeah, that's my situation. Did I miss anything, Brad?
No, well, could you just say a little bit about your wife's job? Is it a very demanding job? Does she also have kind of sort of leadership responsibilities, and what kind of hours does she have to work, Pete?
Yes, it is a demanding job. It is full-time, and she's a manager of people, of a team. So we have to do a lot of coordinating. We basically both are full-time white-collar professionals, and we have to do a lot of coordinating over our shared Google Calendar and Sunday afternoon sort of mini meetings to discuss the week and make sure no one gets left at their lacrosse practice or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I think that's pretty important, because your youngest is how old? 3, did you say?
She's only 3, yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
So you got 2 in school and she's in full-time daycare, is that kind of thing?
So we actually have a nanny, which is helpful. She's at a preschool in the mornings.
Okay. So when you say a nanny, is it an au pair kind of arrangement, Pete?
It is, yes. And that's been hugely helpful, especially during the pandemic.
Oh, I can only imagine. So Duncan, welcome
Hi.
from out there in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
No snow falling, so that's good news, right, Duncan? And maybe you could just introduce yourself, your role, and talk a little bit about your family arrangement as well.
Absolutely. Like Pete, very happy to be here and participate in this. So thanks for the invitation.
No, you're welcome.
So Duncan Warner, I'm a platform HR director for a company called Illinois Toolworks, or ITW. I spent over 28 years of my career working for a division of ITW called Instron, based in Massachusetts. Originally from the UK, and I was moved over by Instron many years ago, and became the division director of human resources about 10 years ago, and then moved into a broader platform role for our parent company about 9 months ago. So I'm now responsible for sort of overseeing the HR strategy and operations within 6 different divisions of ITW. Most of which are Instron focused, but we also have a business in Chicago, and also the business I'm sitting in today in Minnesota.
How about your home life?
Home life, I have 2 children, a 13-year-old son and an 11-year-old / going into 21-year-old daughter. And my wife also works full time. She's also in human resources. She was on this call earlier.
Yes.
I think she had to drop off. So
That's a shame, Duncan, because I wanted to be able to validate what you were saying with your wife, but I saw that she said she had another meeting. So
you're recording this session, so I can run, but I can't hide. So no, she's also in human resources. She's also a director of human resources. She works in the legal industry in Boston, and has always been in that sort of industry for as long as we've known each other. And we actually met on a graduate program at Northeastern in HR. So,
well, and we all know how family friendly the legal industry or legal profession is, right, Duncan?
I can't possibly comment on that.
Because of the recording. Well, I'll comment and say that the legal profession has never been known as being particularly family friendly, and has always focused a little more on billable hours than they are on work-life balance, I think.
Very different culture from what I'm used to. I'm in a manufacturing organization, and very different philosophy, different industries.
Yeah. Could you say a little bit, Pete, about how being a father changed the way you look at your work and your career, if it did? Are there things you look for today that, well, I forget how many years back when you were just a married couple that you were looking for in your career 10, 15 years ago?
Sure. Yeah, I guess I'll say I've always been an ambitious person. I think I've always wanted to, like the studies that you've shared with us, I've always wanted to progress in my career and achieve sort of higher and higher ranks within the organizations that I've been a part of. I think becoming a dad, it introduces these kids that are the best thing ever in your life, and it completely changes what is your primary focus, right? So what was once making that progress in your career, and of course having fun with your spouse and traveling to the extent you can, became sort of, how do we build this family and care for these children that we now love? And that creates that conflict that you've shared with us all in this presentation. And I think it all resonates with me. A lot of those statements fit squarely into my world. And I consider myself sort of wanting to be the egalitarian dad, and I think that happens some weeks, but certainly, unfortunately, it probably skews to conflicted dad. I become conflicted dad sometimes. But I just think children change your priorities, and you know what's really important. I'm missing my boss's staff meeting tomorrow morning because my son's first grade portfolio share day is at 8:30, and it's like, well, I'm going to that. I won't remember her staff meeting, but I will definitely remember my son's first grade portfolio day.
Exactly. I won't ask you what, you're an investment guy, so I hope it's not that kind of portfolio.
No, it's their little art. I don't know.
I thought that was a little young to get started, even for the child of an MBA, right?
Yeah, right.
How about you, Duncan? What's changed on your perspective of career and success and so forth?
I'm very, very similar to Peter in terms of very career focused, as my wife is as well. And I think I've been in a very fortunate situation to work in organizations that have always been very supportive of both my professional career, my academic development, my skill development, and also supporting growth in my family. Getting married and having kids, and that journey, which is it feels like it a million years ago, but so many different things have happened, and I found this sort of really perfect balance between both career and work, which I know I'm incredibly fortunate to have. And I think that has a lot to do with the organization I work for, but more so the people that I've been working for over the years as well. So whoever your supervisor is and the culture of the business you work for, have obviously played a really, really key role in that. I've also seen, interestingly, I think striving to be egalitarian for sure. Definitely situations when I've been conflicted over the years, when I've had longer business trips that I've been on. But to be honest with you, it's being able to manage that balance has been something I've been able to do through the support of the organization that I work for and the people that I work for. So that's my answer.
I think, maybe we should have another category called the egalitarian but conflicted. You know what I mean? Because I think when you guys talk about this, and not knowing, having spoken both of you before, that your wives have a very significant professional role, and I think you mentioned that your wife is in a very demanding in terms of hours and availability, Duncan, that she's probably in a more demanding situation than you are, from the standpoint of just having to be on call, if you will, many times. So I think that it being egalitarian doesn't necessarily mean you don't feel conflict, or you don't have times when you say to yourself, geez, I wish I could be in two places at one time. But it's certainly, with both of you guys, I really get the impression that this is a somewhere around 50-50 proposition between you and your partner. Is that fair?
Yeah, and I think the role has changed as the kids have grown older, right? So, you know, we if I look at where we were when our kids were toddlers, they were in daycare situations. You know, my wife would drop off, I would pick up. Now they're in school, they can get a school bus. My wife still works in Boston, so she gets into the city. Our kids are getting to school in time. That's great. I'm no longer, you know, changing diapers. I'm now teaching, you know, coaching them soccer, and so it's the roles change and pivot as the kids grow older, and I think that's part of the fun of the journey as well.
Absolutely. I used to teach an MBA program a lot at BC. Now I teach seniors, but in the MBA program, I used to have my wife and a couple of other couples come in and talk about how life changes as the kids get older. And you wouldn't believe how many young MBAs say, well, my child is in daycare right now, but once they go to school, it's all going to get a lot simpler. And you get this chuckles like, you've got to be kidding me. But that was it was so funny that was a preconception of so many people. Once they get out of daycare, things are going to get simpler. And it's like, absolutely not. And in fact, I think they get more complicated. Do you think, Pete?
I do. I mean, I think there's we're sort of in that transition because our 3-year-old is even coming out of toddlerhood, I guess, when she turns 4. But the exhaustion of newborns and toddlers does start to subside, but the intensity of these other activities, whether school or after school, they really take up an incredible amount of time and take a lot of effort in planning and to make sure that you do everything that needs to get done.
Yeah. I've talked to both of you guys before about this, and you know, it's especially Duncan, you made a very clear point. I'm going to ask about, are there specific policies that are in place at either of your companies that you think are particularly helpful for working parents? And then after that, I want to quickly get into, is it about policies or is it about, you know, you've mentioned a number of times in our conversations, Duncan, you know, it's about the culture of the organization and the people you work with, which we all sort of know that's where the rubber meets the road. But maybe we'll start with Pete. Pete, are there policies or programs you think that your company offers that are particularly helpful to parents?
Yes, I do. I mean, I think I'll say I have the privilege of working for a company that has equal parental leave for moms and dads and is proactive about pushing everyone to take their leave.
Great.
And actually, it's not even just leave, but encourages folks to take their vacation for sort of mental health reasons and all that stuff. So I think from a formal policy perspective, I think we've got some good things and rules in place and good options available for working parents. But I do think, there's my own opinion, and I'm not on the HR side of things, but I do think the culture is what really helps, and seeing managers model for their teams what should be done for working parents and sort of how we make, and I try to do this for my team, and I'm probably sort of shout it out a little bit more than I would normally do, but you know, I'm leaving to take the kids to the dentist today, or I'm coming in late because of whatever, and I want everyone to know that that's okay. I'm doing it, you should do it. We've got a lot of working parents on the team. Everyone should feel comfortable that that's what is part of our culture. Family first, then work.
Yeah, awesome. And just out of curiosity, do you know how long John Hancock has had that equal leave?
I don't. I've been here 4 years, and it's been here since I arrived.
Since you arrived, but you didn't really have much of an opportunity to take advantage of that because you weren't with,
yes,
at that time, right?
Due to a quirk in the policy where you have to have been an employee for a year before that kicks in. I wasn't eligible for the 12 weeks. My daughter was born while I was in my 6 months into the job. My manager, my boss at the time, was very generous and sort of offered 4 weeks, which I took 100% of.
Awesome.
So that was a good thing.
And did your previous employer offer something like that?
Nope. For the first 2, I just took vacation. I had no leave at either of the prior 2 employers and just took vacation time.
Yeah. Duncan, I know you feel strongly about this as well. Could you maybe share, what your company does in terms of policies or just in terms of climate that makes it, easier for working folks. And
yeah, very, very similar to Pete. Thank you, Pete, for going ahead of me, because you're giving all the complicated answers. I just have to come in and say, yeah, exactly what Pete just said. Even though we're in completely different industries, but no, very, very, very similar. I think ITW has done a really phenomenal job pre-pandemic, even focusing on equal parental leave programs, and making sure that we're covering our employees in these situations, both for newborns but also adopted kids and families that are looking to adopt children. So from that perspective, I think those programs are doing well. And at the end of the day, I think one of the things that you've proved, Brad, and in some of the research, it doesn't matter how many programs you have. It's really about the culture and the climate of the organization, and the focus of the leadership team, and making sure that you have the right core values in place that enables you to support these kinds of programs. Number one, it's having it on a piece of paper is one thing, but actually living it and practicing it. And Pete's example of saying, well, I have to leave early today because I'm taking the kids to the dentist, or we've got soccer practice tonight, so 4 o'clock on Fridays I'll be out of here. Having that at ITW we have a very strong value set. Trust is in front and center in one of those. We also have another value which is quite unique called shared risk, which really looks at making sure we're all in this together, right? So I'm trusting you to be able to do what you're committed to, deliver results, and vice versa. So I put a lot of this down to the culture in the business, and making sure that we're able to model the right behavior as leaders, and then encourage our employees who may not feel as comfortable in taking the leave or doing what they're entitled to do, and actually giving them permission to do so, and being very upfront about that.
Yeah. And, we were going to talk a little bit about the role of leaders, maybe, and some of the things both of you guys just said really spoke to the role of leaders and some of the ways you can be a visible role model. Are there any things you can think of? And it doesn't need to be, that's not an easy question, but where you say, dads, we got to be a little more vigilant with dads if we want them to really feel comfortable about taking their role. I'll start with you, Duncan, because it's a harder question, so that this way you have to say the tricky stuff, and then Pete can just say, yeah, whatever he said. But are there any things you can think of where you say, with dads, it's even more difficult? When we did the parental leave study, by the way, we asked open-ended responses at the end. And one of the things Dad said is maybe we need to make it mandatory for dads to take the leave in order to get over the stumbling block that dads aren't supposed to do this. But that aside, is there any things, Duncan, you can think of we can do specifically to?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a number of things, and I think this is, none of this is really rocket science. It's really, first of all, it's calling out any leadership behaviors that you think might be at odds with what a program is. So if you have a program in place and you have a leader that isn't as supportive, then it's our job as senior leaders within the organization to know that and also call it out for what it is, and making sure that we're correcting that behavior. I also think that it's our responsibility as senior leaders within the organization to challenge the status quo, to make sure that we are keeping in touch with folks like yourself, Brad, and your organization, to really understand what is at the cutting edge. We may not be able to always do what's at the cutting edge, but we should at least be able to address some of the issues that other organizations are able to address in our own way that fits our business and fits our organization. I think sharing our experiences and being really upfront about what it is we're doing and why we're doing it, I think is really critical as well. And one of the things I think we really struggle with, my organization is very heavy in the engineering space, is really being able to lead with empathy. And having empathy as a skill, and it's not easy to do if you're not a very empathetic person. Leading with empathy can be a challenging thing sometimes. So really helping our leaders understand why it's important, and how to get the best out of people with those kinds of scenarios and situations, I think is some of the things that I've seen work in our organization.
Great. Those are great tips. Just before I go to Pete, just two things. One is, if you have a question, anybody in the audience, and you want to type that in, Jennifer will field those. And second thing, I appreciate the call out, but not because it was a commercial message, Duncan, but one of the things that's interesting in terms of working with a center like ours is it's amazing how, like, when you're in an organization, especially a large one, I think you tend to think, well, everybody does it kind of the way we do it. And it's not the case. And when I must say that if anything ever really made me feel like we were having an impact, it was around paternity leave. Because when we did our study in 2013, nobody was doing paternity leave. It was like, oh, I took vacation, or they give me 2 days, or whatever it might be. And then one after another, our members kind of said, well, we're going to expand parental leave. Maybe we shouldn't be doing this in a gender biased way. And I won't pick on the big four because some of them may be on the phone, but it was interesting that the minute one of the big four decided we're going to offer gender equitable pay leave, for some coincidence, the other three immediately also began offering that. Because, and one of the great things about being part of some kind of consortium like this is you get a sense of, you may have a tradition or something that may have been in your company for years, but it may not be, relevant these days, or it may need to be updated in terms of your thinking. And so one of the things that's been great about parental leave, and especially for dads, has been so many of the organizations we work with have looked at one another and said, gee, they're doing it, and they seem to be having a really positive response from this. And by the way, dads are more satisfied with the amount of parental leave they're given than moms are, because, for dads, a lot of times they never expected it, and when they get it, they're extremely appreciative. So how about you, Pete, as a leader? Are there any things specifically you can think of to support work family stuff, but especially for working dads? Anything?
Yeah, sure. And first off, thanks, Duncan, for going first. And well said. Great answer. No, I guess. Oh, and by the way, I'll just mention, Brad, my company cuts off access to Zoom chat, so I can't see if there's any questions for
That's
me.
okay.
Yeah, I'm not ignoring them intentionally.
No.
I apologize.
Yeah,
I just need to shout out that they're there.
Yeah. Okay.
But for me, I guess the policies are in place. I feel like we have the good formal sort of institutionalization of the policies, but actually getting folks to use them is where the leadership comes in. And I think we're trying to be intentional about almost assuming that, especially since we're talking about dads, that dads are taking their leave and that they're going to take all of it. And it's often the case, we have a lot of new dads on the team now, that they're chunking it in different ways. They're not necessarily 12 weeks from birth to 12 weeks after, but we want to make sure that they're not forgetting, oh, I took my first 4 weeks, and then I'm like, you still have 8 weeks. And we're building into our planning and really sharing that we are assuming that you are taking this, and we are working around that. And that is our assumption, that you will take that. And then there's much smaller things, I guess, just even around being respectful of people's time when it comes to meetings and when it comes to emails, trying to be, again, empathetic, putting yourselves in the shoes of working parents, knowing that mornings are insane, afternoon and evenings are insane. Taking the time to put a schedule send and having it go at 9:15 in the morning, which is sort of squarely in working hours,
Right.
even if you happen to be doing your work at 9:15 at night,
Yep.
because that's what works for you, I think is something that we're trying to model and then really push our teams to do just across the board and make that part of the culture.
That's great. Thank you. Jennifer, do we have any questions? If not, we can. Oh,
so we do. So we have a comment here first from our friend David Smith, who has joined us about what Peter was saying about announcing. He was taking his kids to the dentist. He's got a name for that, and it's called leaving loudly. So that's something that I think we can all remember and take away. And then he's following that with a question. Do your organizations provide any training for managers to upskill in how to implement work-life policies and practices to give managers the skills and techniques to create more equitable work-family environments on their teams?
We got just a few minutes left. Do you want to start with that one, Duncan?
Yeah, I mean, we don't do anything directly. It's a great idea. Again, I think we focus more on what we expect of our leaders in terms of just general expectations as people leaders, and making sure that we're educating people on what the programs are. But we aren't doing any specific training on how to deliver that message. But I think there's an opportunity there for sure.
There is an opportunity, and I think when you talk about empathy, that may be the most important skill they would have, right, or along these lines, is to say, I understand, you know, especially if you've been there yourself, to say, I understand the situation, and how can I help you with this, as opposed to saying, you know, making it, you know, a lot more threatening for people to raise these kinds of issues in the workplace. Pete, you have any ideas here?
No, I think it's a great idea. I agree with Duncan. Unfortunately, our organization doesn't have any formal training like that. I think occasionally we, in one-off ways, try to send out emails with recommendations for managers on how to manage certain aspects of this, and sort of maintaining work-life balance for the teams, but there's nothing formal.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I know a great professor you guys could go talk to if you need some formal help there.
Yeah, Jennifer's always free, right?
Yeah. That's right. But yeah, and Dave Smith, what was his term? Leaving loudly?
Yes.
Dave Smith.
I love that. I love that.
See, he's an academic at Johns Hopkins, but he publishes these books and they sell. Hi, David. You know, I've got to start getting these buzzwords like David has, because his books sell and my book never did. So anyway.
Well, my wife went to SAIS, so I'll tell her we got the Johns Hopkins connection. That's great.
Oh, very good. Jennifer, anything else? Because we only have a minute or two left.
Yeah, I think nothing that really needs to be responded to at this point.
Okay, great. Well, guys, as always, it's been a pleasure to talk to you, and I appreciate your candor, and I also appreciate the insights that you provided. And you and the rest of the members that we work with are what makes this job so pleasurable, because it's great to work with such great organizations and people that really do care about these issues. And it's been a pleasure. So you can take the rest of the week off, as far as I'm concerned. You'd have to check in with your boss, I'm sure, about that. But thanks so much, guys. It was really a pleasure. And thank you, Jennifer. Do you have anything we want to wrap up with?
No, just wanted to say, you know, have a happy Father's Day to all the dads out there. We will follow up with the link to the recording and some more information with you about dads tomorrow. If you'd like to share that internally within your organizations, we encourage you to do that.
Right. And our fall member meeting will be October 2nd through 4th. So get that on your calendar if it isn't already. And we look forward to seeing a lot of you in Boston in the fall. Thanks very much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer. Thanks, everyone.